Today on Beyond 6 Seconds.
There are so many people in the workplace that cover different aspects, really important aspects of who they are. Because they are afraid of losing their job, they are afraid of being passed over by stretch assignments. There's just a lot of fear, and that leads to people feeling a lack of purpose on the job.
Welcome to Beyond 6 Seconds, the podcast that goes beyond the 6-second first impression to share the extraordinary stories and achievements of everyday people. I'm your host, Carolyn Keel. On today's episode, I'm speaking with Rhodes Perry. Rhodes believes in the power of authenticity at work. He puts this belief into practice by helping business leaders, change agents, and visionaries at all levels cultivate workplace cultures of belonging through his leadership and management consulting firm. He's an award-winning social entrepreneur, best-selling author, and sought-after speaker. He's a nationally recognized LGBTQ thought leader with 2 decades of government and nonprofit experience, having worked at the White House, PFLAG National, and the City of New York. Rhodes also hosts a weekly podcast, The Out Entrepreneur, which has empowered over 35,000 LGBTQ and ally entrepreneurs to pursue their professional passions and build the businesses of their dreams. Rhodes, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Carolyn. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you here today. So I'm really interested to learn more about your experiences that shaped your career and led you to a career in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what inspired you to pursue that career.
Yeah, it's been a career filled with a lot of twists and turns. And all of it, it's kind of following the breadcrumbs. When you look back in hindsight, it makes sense. And as I was on the path, I wasn't totally sure which direction I was going in, but where I'm at now, I'm really, really grateful. I started out my career interning actually at the National Organization for Women 2 decades ago. So it seems like a long time ago. And that was really my first taste of being an advocate and advocating for things like pay equity and benefits for family leave time in other Western industrialized countries. These types of benefits are available for all workers. And it got me a taste of how to make change and how to work inside systems, large systems, whether they're government or nonprofit, or even in corporate settings, and in working with leadership to make a case and to talk about the benefits of looking out for all workers. And that really inspired me. I had the opportunity later in my career to work in organizations like PFLAG National, like you said in my bio, where again, I was advocating mostly for LGBTQ workers at the federal level on trying to get legislation passed like the Employment Non-Discrimination Act at that point in time, which basically added protections in the workplace for any employers with 15 or more employees if on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. So essentially protecting LGBT communities. And again, I really love doing that. And we made a lot of progress. We weren't able to pass that particular law, but we were able to make a lot of progress between the years of 2008 and 2012. And at some point, I felt like I was a little bit in an echo chamber where we were passing legislation or we were getting regulations in place and looking out for workers. And I felt there was still this gap between employers struggling with, okay, we have these laws, we have to comply with them, but we have no idea how to do that. And there were practitioners out there at the time that were available to help, but there weren't enough. I mean, I think even today, there are so many different regulations and laws that HR and employers have to figure out how to put into place. And they look for outside support through consultancies like the one that I run now on that guidance on how to do it. So I decided to take the leap 3 years ago to start my own company to really expand my reach and to help as many employers as I can that have already been converted. They already see the business case of welcoming diverse employees, people from underrepresented communities in a variety of different sectors, and just are struggling with how to do it. And oftentimes are a little paralyzed by analysis paralysis, right? Of we know that we need to do this, but we're not sure where to start. So that's kind of my career, the Cliff Notes version of it, and where I'm at right now.
Wow. So you really started off, it sounds like even from the earliest parts of your career, you were involved in advocacy and equity, and that you spent a lot of your time at the federal level and with groups that promoted that advocacy and activism. Like you really spent a lot of time sort of trying to enact that policy and getting quite involved with that.
Yeah, definitely. And I did spend a lot of time as well working in federal agencies. One of my first jobs was working in the Department of Justice. I also worked for the White House in the Office of Management and Budget. And the last job when I was working for someone else was working for the city of New York, helping their child welfare and juvenile justice agencies with becoming more inclusive of LGBT families and young people in those systems. And so I was responsible for implementing a variety of different policies across these huge systems. So, 30,000 people, 7,000 administrators, and the rest of the staff were contracting staff all across the 5 boroughs of New York. And that was a really great opportunity to be in one system and learn how to take a commitment that's made at the highest levels in the commissioner's office and mapping out how do we actually manage this change and how do we set benchmarks and see that we're making progress and to communicate that there's a real value to that. And all of that really shaped who I am today and how I show up for different clients that I work with. And it's really exciting, when leaders have this aha moment where they understand why this matters, and more importantly, they can see that progress. They can see their investments. And there's enough of a business case out there. There's enough of the data that can show us why this matters. And when it translates into individual experiences where an individual employee who has traditionally felt that they didn't belong in that workplace shifts and they feel like they do have a place there, that to me is why I do this work.
That's great. Being able to translate what's on paper, what's in law, or what's in policy, and really connecting it for business owners so that they could see that impact to the business, to their employees, and ultimately to their consumers, I would imagine as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a book out. It's called Belonging at Work.
Mm-hmm.
And in that book, I write a little bit about my own story. I always say everyone has their own diversity story, even the most enfranchised people that we can think of in the workplace. Where I go as Wall Street, thinking about white men working on Wall Street, right? But even for those guys, they have their own diversity story. And I push clients to really think about that. And so I share one aspect of my own just to kind of communicate this sense of belonging, which feels, if you're not in this work, I often receive this in members of my family of like, what do you do? I don't quite understand. How does this matter? Why would people invest in this? And so I share the story of when I was working at the White House. I really loved the job that I had. I was working on income maintenance programs. So I had the ability to manage the budgets of the Social Security Administration's administrative budget. And I was looking at disability insurance programs. We were trying to make them better. So we were really working on programs helping people basically navigate and not get into poverty, right? Like the safety net programs that were available. And so I was hired to do that job, because of my background in public administration and finance and things of that nature. And I didn't feel like I fit in when I was there. And so for your listeners, I'm a white guy. On the outset, people can look at me and I have many, many privileges and advantages. And I'm also someone who's bisexual and I'm transgender. And so I'm a transgender guy. So that basically means I was assigned female at birth. I lived a life where I was raised as a young girl and a young woman, and I transitioned when I was 20. And when I first got my job at the White House, I was 26. So people saw me exactly how I am in the world and affirmed who I am, which is great. And when I shared my story, I was sharing, when you're with your colleagues, you're at the water cooler, you're on site visits, you're traveling across the country, you connect, you start to build rapport, you start to build morale, and, you start talking about your childhood and things of your past that are important. And I felt that I couldn't share aspects of my gender history. Now, mind you, this was 2006. So I think the world still isn't quite up to speed on trans communities. At that time, definitely not. There's a statistic out in 2008. I think it was 8% of people in the United States knew someone who is trans or worked with someone who's transgender. So that was the environment that I was in. There were no job protections at that time for me. So it was a very isolating experience. And it allowed me to build empathy, to connect with other folks who are from underrepresented communities in the workplace where you can't share all of yourself. You have to code switch. You have to, for myself, basically what that meant is I had to censor different aspects of my experience in high school or junior high. Instead of playing on the softball team, I played sports. I had to kind of erase some really important aspects of who I am in the world. And I write about this as a failure for me. I felt like I was failing, being an advocate, being an LGBT advocate, and not being 100% out in the workplace. And I felt that I failed in really living what I believe, which is living and being authentic. But I use that as an example because there are so many people in the workplace that cover different aspects, really important aspects of who they are, because they are afraid of losing their job. They are afraid of being passed over by stretch assignments. There's just a lot of fear that leads to people feeling a lack of purpose on the job. In the book that I wrote, I talk about a stat that really stood out for me, which is that 72% of workers feel that they don't have a sense of purpose and they don't have a connection of feeling that they're contributing meaningful work. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge loss. That means that there are only 28% of workers in the United States that show up to work, feel that their contributions have purpose. They feel that they are recognized, that they have a sense of belonging. And if we could inverse that, what would that mean for workplaces? What would that mean individually for the human condition? The sense of belonging on the Maslow's pyramid of needs is just above safety, psychological and physical safety and well-being. So it's integral to who we are. And that, to me, should be enough of a business case for leaders to really take this topic seriously and take a hard look at the workplace culture that has been established. Oftentimes, workplace culture is more implicit. It's not something that's intentional. And you and I both work in a space where we talk with many, many different entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. And I try, when I'm talking with folks just getting started and scaling really fast, of really defining what their organization's purpose is and how they are intentionally building a culture that they want to create. And many want to create inclusive cultures. They just don't know how. And I think that first step is to really visualize what that is, what it looks like, all five senses, so that you're more likely to take active steps to achieve that rather than implicitly getting what you will get, and then 10 years later you look back. And I think we can name a number of different tech companies that 30 years ago didn't even exist. Mm-hmm. And now today there's a real challenge in creating more inclusive cultures because of the bad media that's out there right mm-hmm. now. And the reality that many workers are just suffering because leaders have not taken that first step of really understanding what culture they want to create.
Yeah, plus companies and organizations are under a lot of new pressures now that they weren't even just a few years ago, where they really need to be able to truly leverage all of the talent that they have within their own employees. Because, globalization and rapid change and just the need for innovation. And, if you've got people who are coming to work and need to spend some of that mental time covering for who they are, that's time that they could be using. They could be using that energy to benefit and enhance the company and bring new ideas, trying to build those cultures of where people feel like their opinions are wanted, that they're being heard, that they have the same opportunities to share ideas and do meaningful work and opportunities to advance within the organization, develop their careers. I think that's where a lot of companies are really trying to get to.
Yeah, definitely. And I like what you were saying about the energy that's lost. Mm-hmm. And I often use, if I am talking to a tech company, I often use an example of a computer where you have so much memory or so much storage or processing space. And if 25% of that is being directed outside of the task at hand, what is lost in that? And it's an inefficiency, at its base level. And again, kind of going back to the individual, that is so much energy that it's hard to quantify what that does to you psychologically. And if a workplace is working to address that and to proactively change culture, that can alleviate a lot of suffering for an individual, and it can help benefit the organization in terms of its bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. So you had a whole career where you're working with federal agencies and government agencies in the city of New York. And then at some point you decided to go out on your own and do your own consulting around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then, of course, you wrote your book, Belonging at Work. So what was the impetus for that change in your career?
Yeah, there were a couple of things. I think the first is that I really enjoyed the work that I was doing in New York, and I was seeing a lot of really great changes. And At that time, there were a number of other agencies across the country that were also recognizing the progress that we were making. And I was fielding many of those calls, and people were asking for help and how did you do this? And we would love to try to replicate or adapt some of the things that are working well in New York in our systems. And I tried to help them as much as I could. And I realized at some point, I was like, there is a business model to this where I could help more people and create more change in many different systems across the country. And I think that gave me the confidence of realizing that I could do it, that people really were respecting the work that I was doing. And I felt like I needed to grow. And this was the next logical step. And it's a big mindset shift. And there's a lot of fear to stepping out, at least for me. I can speak for myself. There was a lot of fear for myself. And if this was the right move, and I just trusted my gut, I guess, and I took that leap, and it's been incredible. I've been able to work with clients in many different sectors, and very unlikely sectors sometimes, where I'm right now I'm working with a very large Catholic organization, a healthcare organization, wanting to be more inclusive of underrepresented communities, and they're leading with trying to include more trans and non-binary people in their practice, both hiring people from those communities as well as serving more trans and non-binary people, which is, I think, kind of breaks down some myths that people may have of faith-based organizations and some stereotypes that might exist there. So it's been really hard in building my own business. And at the same time, it's been incredibly rewarding. And I think it's helped me become a better person in how I'm showing up in my life more holistically than beyond just work, if that makes sense.
Wow. Is that because you feel like you're able to have more of a direct impact on the organizations that you're working with?
Yeah, I think it's the ability, one, to choose. I talk with other leaders about how they build their culture in their workplaces. And it almost feels like I have the keys to the kingdom of how to do that in my own business, really, really intentionally. So when I'm contracting work out, really thinking about how to do that in an equitable way. If I'm taking on clients, really taking the hard look of, yes, this is more revenue. Does this client fit within the values of the business that I'm trying to build? And so it's really walking the talk in a lot of ways. And it feels rewarding to do that. Yeah, I think that's been some of the best parts of doing this. And I feel really privileged to be able to do it. And that to me is really important to consider. How do I then give back to the communities where I come from? And so that's one of the big things that I'm trying to do in my business now is when I'm not working on my business, I volunteer some of my time to the local LGBT Chamber of Commerce here in Portland. And what we're trying to do right now is economic opportunities to transgender and non-binary people in the area, just to have access to get jobs and to work with employers to understand what some of those barriers are for my own community. And so I feel that it's so important to me in my business to figure out, of the profit that's being generated, how do I give back? And it feels great to be able to do that.
That's wonderful. And how long have you been doing your own consulting?
I have just reached my third year as of January 6th. So, it's just like drinking water out of a fire hydrant.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I've learned so much every single day. It's almost like a crash course in getting an MBA really fast. I'm very humbled by the process of running a business.
Right. Fantastic. I know you mentioned some of the clients that you were working with in your last answer. I'm curious to know if you have, in those 3 years that you've been doing the consulting, do you have any memorable success stories or just memorable impacts that you've been able to have with a client?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the bigger clients that I'm still working with now, I think it's the aha moment where this is not the chief diversity officer's job. Mm-hmm. I'm working for this particular client that I'm thinking of, working with their leadership team. So people in HR, people in mission, the CEO themselves, really getting them to, one, understand what their own diversity stories are, in their own words, communicating why this matters to the organization, and then being able to share that broadly with 15,000 employees in an authentic way where employees really can recognize, yes, like our leadership team is getting this, and they're proactively building systems of leaders in 3 different states to be able to lead on this work, building employee resource groups and building the infrastructure to sustain this work rather than writing a very beautiful and eloquently written diversity, equity, and inclusion vision statement and leaving it at that. And that's where they started, and they were having a lot of problems. And so I've been working with them for about 1.5 years. And to me, when I see leaders have that aha moment, well, 2 things happen. First, there's this fear of like, oh my God, we have to boil the entire ocean. And then kind of, taking a step back and working with them to kind of coach them through step by step. This is how we plan it out. It's not going to happen overnight. And here's how we can start measuring success. And when I work with clients in that capacity, where it's a little bit of a longer term commitment, that's where I can see the change, in the evolution. And it makes me feel good to devote my time to help them in that way.
That's great. When we were talking earlier, you were saying that belonging at work or diversity, equity, inclusion might potentially look a little different depending on the organization, and that it's something that organizations really need to actively think about. Do you help your clients think through what that looks like for them and then put plans around executing on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I start with clarifying what it is that we're talking about, why I'm being brought in, because that, it kind of goes back to what I was saying about selecting clients that are a good fit for me versus, there's many, many practitioners out there that have different skills and do different services. And many times I'm brought in initially by folks who say, hey, we would love to have a diversity training. That's usually a red flag for me that there may have been a problem, or a leader may be proactive and recognize they need to do something, but they don't know where to start. And their thinking isn't holistic or thinking strategically. It's thinking more that, oh, this is just a learning and education activity that we need to do for our staff. And once that's done one time, everything will be better. Usually if I am brought in and I share the bigger picture that this is more about the leadership team first and foremost, it's about your organization's culture broadly, then we can start talking about some of the tactics around changing policies or systems or trainings. If the team is receptive to that, then we're ready to kind of play ball and really kind of sit down and map out what it is that they need to do for their particular organization, considering their sector, considering the size, considering their budget, as opposed to folks who think that they may know and are pretty adamant of like, we just need to do a training and that's it and we're done. And I usually provide a lot of referrals and say, good luck, because I don't feel like I'm making a good impact if I don't have that ability to really clarify what their vision is and kind of coach them around how to get there, to get to this kind of holistic approach that can be sustained regardless of resources, regardless of time, that it could still be part of their broader strategic goals. And it should be, that's how I coach and help a variety of different clients.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because it's really like it's a type of culture change, and that's not something that you can do in one training or, that you can do quickly. It really is creating that whole, system of people, processes, technology to support the change itself. And you really need everything working together to sustain it.
Absolutely. And when I'm working with leaders who I'm trying to bridge that connection, I'll talk about, asking them, when they're managing, switching over a computer system, what would be the approach that you would do that across your organization? And they can very quickly kind of map that out for me. And then I try to translate how this works fits into that similar approach of how they manage bigger change. And I think that can help allay some of the concern of, oh, we have to boil the ocean. We have no idea how. Oftentimes there's the systems and the processes that already exist for other changes in the workplace, but these are kind of the concrete, the tangible. We're switching our computers from Apple to Dell or, whatever. There's that piece that they already have in play. And it's just kind of doing that translation for them around how to manage culture change, and that it's not as hard as we make it out to be. It's just, that's the part that is where organization by organization, they get to customize what those metrics are for success, and it really clarifying what does success look like before we get started. Because if not, we're going to be spinning our wheels and, frustrating a lot of folks that want to see this work succeed in a sincere way.
Exactly. Yeah, it's important to be able to communicate back to people and show the progress you're making, even if it's just everything from kind of quick wins, so you can kind of get that early momentum, and then long term, what do you really want to achieve as an organization by implementing these changes to your culture around, increasing diversity and inclusion and equity? And you've also written a book, as we said earlier, and it's called Belonging at Work. What was your inspiration to write a book on this topic?
Yeah, my inspiration was that when working with clients, again, many folks, they want to go right to the how to do it. So what I wanted to do was not just for, the kind of the C-suite to have kind of a manual, but to give a resource guide to anyone in the workplace that feels like they feel frustrated or they feel like they don't have power to make change to create a culture where they belong or where they can signal to other colleagues that they have a place there. I wanted to create something that could take simple actions that could make a world of difference, no matter where you sit inside of a large organization or a small organization. That coupled with my own experiences in a variety of different workplaces, feeling like I couldn't be my whole self or the workplace wasn't quite ready to support me as someone who's a transgender employee. So I think both the personal and my experiences of working with other clients, like trying to deliver something that has some concrete approaches, but also the book is divided into 3 parts, describing what does it mean to belong at work, why does this matter, and how do you do it? So outside of the how, I also want to give folks on the why some talking points for whether there's other champions of this work in the workplace or talking points for people that are a little more recalcitrant to really make that case of why this matters and to also be clear on what we're talking about. So I think I was able to accomplish that. I'm getting a lot of good praise from the book right now, which feels good because it's always a little vulnerable when you put something out like that in the world. And for me, if it helps just one person make the change that they want to see, then I feel like I've succeeded. And I just hope that this gets out to as many people as possible to try to break down some of what feels either abstract or too overwhelming to just kind of, small steps to work towards that change.
So who should read this book? Do you have to be a people leader at a company? Can you read it and then help out your colleagues? Can you use it to help yourself?
Yeah. When you write a book, you always do kind of these visualization exercises of who is the ideal reader. And I say that the book is for leaders, visionaries, movers and shakers, and those on their way to joining them. Mm-hmm. So I feel like if you're someone who has a fire in your belly and you feel like something is off in your workplace, or you think that your workplace could be better at including everyone on your team, then this is the book for you. It's a book that even if you're someone like me who is a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner, there are talking points, there's research, there's different anecdotes and stories that can help you be more effective at what you're doing, regardless of how you approach this work, as well as just for someone who's interested in the topic. I feel like it's a good entry point just to kind of understand some of the more updated literature that's out there and to get started and to help affect positive change and ultimately help an organization be better.
Yeah, that's great to know that, you don't have to be in charge of a company or an organization to essentially help change that culture and help people feel like they belong at work. So, certainly a lot of the change really needs to come from leadership, and a lot of culture and diversity related changes really do start at the top, but everybody has a role to create that type of environment and create that type of culture. So that's great that you can kind of help outline what that could be for everybody.
Yeah. And you said that so nicely. Leaders absolutely set the tone. And, it takes everyone, like you said, to create a workplace where people feel that they fit in, because it only takes one person, wherever they are in the organization, to create a toxic environment. Mm-hmm. Right. And so this is a team effort. And the idea of this book is to help support people no matter what their positions are on the team.
Wonderful. Wow. So, it sounds like you've done a lot of really amazing work, even in just these past couple of years with your own consulting and with your book. Looking forward, what goals do you have for your business?
Well, this year, I want to do more online offerings. And so I'm building off of some of the work that I've done in the past. I've done online courses and I've done, different email coaching programs. This year, I'm working with Radical Summits. It's a small business up here in the Pacific Northwest. And we're going to put on Belonging Summit in October. So it's a 5-day virtual summit. And I'm really excited by it because I feel like the reach of the message of this book, the content, allowing people to kind of have the opportunity to really to dive in deep on some of the themes that are offered in the book and to hear from other diversity, equity, and inclusion thought leaders. There are many who are featured in the book that I wrote, but real time to be able to engage. I feel like this is an exciting new endeavor for me, and it kind of builds off of some of the podcasting that I've done in the past, and just hosting a really nice event where you don't have to physically travel to a conference that takes up a lot of your time, a lot of your resources. It's something that you could engage in as much as you want to, or as little as you want to, just to hear that one speaker and really learn something that can be actionable going forward in the work that you're doing in your organization. So that's one big thing that I'm pushing myself to do this year. It's a lot of work. Mm-hmm. I think it's probably as much work as putting out a book. Mm-hmm. But I think from that, building relationships and learning from other folks who are doing this work as well, I think it's a great, bringing people together like this, it always generates new ideas and new avenues for business. So I'm looking forward to that and continuing with the client work that I continue to do. I'm doing more one-on-one inclusion consulting for more kind of C-suite folks. And that's been a lot of fun. That's really rewarding because really getting to dig into the psyche of what's holding an individual leader back. And oftentimes it's, like I said earlier in this interview, people are really afraid to do the wrong thing. Yeah. And by virtue, they do nothing. So kind of working around those barriers and kind of building out the business that way and continuing to learn. I will continue to show up doing my own podcast, interviewing different business leaders and learning from where they're at in their own business. And usually they're at least a decade ahead of where I am, trying to pick their brains to map out next steps. Yeah, so there's a lot of opportunity in this field. And I think that we're just at the beginning of really massive culture change, and it's long overdue.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like companies have understood the importance of diversity, which then became diversity and inclusion and continues to evolve. But, a lot of companies still struggle to implement it, to get beyond that vision statement. So it sounds like the work that you're doing with your book and your consulting and online summits and all the learning that you're doing is really, helping people, coaching them through that process, one client at a time, and really helping them unlock the true value of diversity, inclusion, and equity for their own businesses and their employees.
Yeah, it's an exciting time. And I think that you're right. Leaders are struggling, and they also know the reality. They know how demographics continue to change in the United States alone. They see how connected we are globally. And with the way that technology is, that will only continue to ramp up. Mm-hmm. And especially for multinational companies, organizations, are really learning how to bridge cultural differences, especially in the workplace. If you have someone who is a worker who's working virtually from a different country, these are examples that I use in my book. Really understanding, even running a meeting, the differences of someone from a different culture and what the cultural norms are and how they participate in meetings versus how people in the United States participate in meetings. And so I love this field, and I feel like I learn something new every day. And I'm glad to share that wisdom and knowledge with other folks.
All right. Awesome. How can people get in touch with you to learn more about your consulting work, your podcast, your book?
Yeah, like the single one place that I would say is just go to my website. It's rhodesperry.com, RHODES, Perry, all one word, .com. And if you want to check out the book, the best place is just if you type in Rhodes on Amazon.com, you'll be able to see the book there. And I have a special going in February. I'm offering a 30-day belonging challenge. So for folks who are interested in this topic and want to have someone kind of work with them, every day, I offer one email a day. It takes about 5 minutes, and you get to actually play with 30 different strategies that you can do no matter your position in your organization. That is available also on my website. If you just go to the resources page at the top, you'll see it there. And it should be fun. I'm planning to have about 30 people in that group. Maybe there will be more. It depends. But I think that'll be a good number of working with folks, and also peer-to-peer support. So we'll be doing 2 different coaching calls during that month.
Wonderful. So I will put the link to your website in the show notes so that people can refer to that easily and find all that great information.
Great. Thank you so much, Carolyn. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Rhodes, for being a guest on my podcast. And just to close things out, is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know, or anything else that they can help or support you with?
At this point, just make that commitment to self-educate, to learn more about this topic, and to join and grow the belonging movement. I think that that's the best thing that folks can do to support the work that I'm doing in the world.
Wonderful. Thank you again. Really enjoyed speaking with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to Beyond 6 Seconds. Please help us spread the word about this podcast. Share it with a friend. Give us a shout out on your social media, or write a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast player. You can find all of our episodes on our website, www.beyond6seconds.com. Until next time.